Dr. Reed, I've got a bunch of questions for you this morning to recall some of the things that you've done in your life. And I've interspersed some dentistry questions with some of your World War II experiences. So they're not necessarily in any chronological order, but I just thought I'd prompt you and maybe you could tell us a little bit about some events. Okay, so I'll start with the first one. Could you tell us about your experience with the selection of pilots for both the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan and the reconnaissance missions that I think you were in line for?
The drafting of pilots.
Well, for whatever you know about the Enola Gay.
Well, Holcott started that in 1944, and I was put on loan to the Air Force, Army Air Force. I was Navy
Mm-hmm.
because I was a carrier pilot and also a reconnaissance photographic pilot. I went to Windover Field and was there. I photographed while they made practice drops out in the pass. And it wasn't remarkable my stay there, but security was a big thing. Colonel Tibbets, Lieutenant Colonel, security. He court-martialed a few full colonels, kept them out of the Army, sent some to Alaska, I think one or two to Siberia, I never did know. But what I'm laughing about, come Christmas of '44, he said, "You're going to take leave. You can take your plane or one of our planes. You'll go to New Orleans and you'll eat at Giltor's and sit at the counter." And I said, "What are my orders?" And he said, "You'll find out maybe someday, maybe nothing. Just be yourself. And if you have anything to report, well, let me know or I'll ask questions." So I came back and he asked a question. I said, "Well, I've sat next to an Army sergeant." And he looked at me, spotted my wings. He said, "Oh, I'm in aviation too. We fly B-29s." And I said, "Indeed. Well, I've just seen them taxi by me. That's all I know." And I said, "What can you tell me about them?" And I said, he told me quite a bit, which I won't repeat because you already know. And I said the conversation came to a lull. I did a lot of listening. I just told him that I was primarily a fighter pilot. So he just shook his head and nodded like I was dismissed. Next thing I knew, I found out later on, he'd called the sergeant in. The sergeant was there on the base. He was a mechanic. And there'd been cautioned about running her mouth. And then it dawned on me, I'd been sent down there to eat at Geltor's because he hung out there, right there. And sure enough, he did run his mouth. But he forgave him finally and kept him because he was an adequate person. No harm was done. One of his pilots there that was in training took a B-29, flew to his hometown, landed on a civilian airport, left it unguarded, brought his father aboard and showed it. He called him in and asked him about it. And he said, "What about you bringing a civilian aboard this plane?" "Well, that's my father, and he's interested in aviation." He says, "Get the hell out of here." He says, "You're damn lucky I don't court-martial you." He says, "You're going to Alaska." And that's the last we saw, and he's a full colonel. So anyhow, Colonel Tibbets was a very serious man. Does that answer your question?
It answers part of it.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you were in line for the reconnaissance mission following the Enola Gay and
I was. It was planned that I make a low-level circle, a primary target, which turned out to be Hiroshima or Hiroshima, and photograph the bomb as it went off at a low level. they told me, he said, you'll probably lose the sight of one eye and you might lose the sight of both of them according to your life. However, they scrubbed my mission about 30 minutes before I was to take off from a carrier. In other words, I was to take off from the carrier and rendezvous at the same time that Enola Gay and the weather planes and the observation planes all showed up. But Colonel Tibbets, he got to thinking, and Captain Parsons, Navy captain, ordnance man, said there'd be too many planes in the area. Sure enough, that was the way it was. The Japanese thought they were just weather reconnaissance planes. I don't think he even they may have turned the air raid alarm on, sirens. But anyhow, that's as close as I got to it. I had some interesting happenings along the way, if you want to hear about them.
Yes, I thought you made a visit with some rather high-level people, and various pilots were being bumped for the mission.
Well, we had several of them there, but I met them, and I kept a low profile and didn't mingle with them too much because everyone kept their mouth shut. But the ones I can remember was Etherly. I just remember meeting him. Oh, it leaves me now. But the other people that were associated with it, one of them was First Lieutenant Beeser of the Army Air Force, an a radar officer. Captain Parsons of the Navy, a captain in the Navy's four-striper, comparable to a colonel. He armed the bomb in flight. And he was quite a nice person. But like I say, most of them were quiet. There was a Captain, Robert Lewis, who was co-pilot, and he had a personality problem, but he was a good pilot. I kept clear away from him, and I'd had no reason to be around him. But he and Tibbets didn't get along either, but Colonel Tibbets said he can handle the matter, he knows what to do. So, trying to think who else I met there. We had a conference back in Washington where Harry Truman presided over, the then president. And they were discussing whether they should drop the bomb or not. And I think a discussion came up, said, well, if they know that we have it and are afraid to use it, well, then that's bad. That was the last discussion. The other one was, if we put on a demonstration and it's a dud, well, then we have failed. So they decided not to put on a demonstration. Others said, let's don't drop it, it's inhumane. That was entitled to their opinion. I didn't share it with them. But anyhow, they finally decided they would drop it. Then they decided the primary target would be Hiroshima. Some people, never knew which one it was. What's the funny part of it was is this Navy, Lieutenant Beeser had not shown up. He was supposed to be there, but he didn't make an appearance. And he showed up at the last minute. This whack guard wouldn't let him in. She said, you kidding? No one but top brass gets in there, not a first lieutenant. And he finally got him to go in and ask him, and Colonel Tibbets said, admit him, yes, we need him. So he came in and sat down. About that time, the stuffed shirt of a Navy captain got up, and he said, well, I propose that the Navy become involved, and we have a submarine off of the coast of the primary target, and that the plane will home in on it in case they get fouled up on their navigation, which they would if those guys were perfect. And so they can home in on it. So they called on Colonel Tibbets, and he turned around to Lieutenant Beecher and says, address this thing, but I believe it was Bob or Robert, I'm not sure. So he got up and he said, quote, it's bullshit. This captain's swelled up like a poisoned toad, go on like that. And so they quieted down a little bit, and President Truman said, well, let us hear more about this bullshit. Now, he had a barnyard vocabulary, had you heard?
No, I didn't.
Oh, Lord, something terrible, I guess. I never met him before.
You're talking about Truman.
Yes. So he said, well, the submarine bobbing around in the ocean be like a cork in a gale or a typhoon, and you're lucky to get within 100 miles of the primary target if you home in on that. So that ended that. So this Beecher sat down and said to Colonel Tibbets, he said, well, how'd I do? And he said, well, all right, I think you said you're lucky you got away with using that kind of language, but the President Truman does also, and that ended that. So I laugh my head off as a stuffed shirt goes up. And then when they told him that, well, he swelled up like a poisoned toad, that was funny. So I dwell on the humorous things. Later on, Colonel Tibbets called me in. He said, have you heard any scuttlebutt? That was the slang name in the Navy for gossip, talk, rumors. And I said, yes. And I said, I've heard some. And he said, what's that? I told him, seriously, I said, a couple of Blue Jackets sailors aboard the carrier said that they heard, said, Mr. Reed, they said, quote, we hear, Mr. Reed, quote, we hear that we have a weapon that's so powerful that if it is used, it'll blow the entire fantail back half of the ship off. And if another ship goes through there where the ashes are falling, that it'll sink. And I said, well, stop and think about it. How could they do that so precisely? I knew what they were talking about. And occasionally we were asked questions by different people to see if we would run our mouth. And I addressed it. I said, so that was one thing. I said, the other thing, the Army Air Force, Blanchard, Colonel Blanchard, LeMay, I said, they're trying to do this. And I said, they want to take over and fly the delivery plane. And, well, I could see his expression. I said, another one too, the Navy wants to get in the act, and I said, I'm not betraying my Navy, but if they're right, they're right, if they're wrong, they're wrong. And they have a prima donna that they're grooming, and want that guy to fly the plane. He said, can this prima donna handle the plane? I said, I don't think he could handle the kitty car. And he said, what is he? I said, well, he's a quote, he's a, we'll say a chicken bastard for the presence of the lady. Well, anyhow, he said, you know his name? And I said, yes, sir. And I never volunteered anything, and he just didn't do that. I said, his name is Stratton, sir, Lieutenant Commander Stratton. All right, that's all. Thank you, you're dismissed. So I was sitting out in the commons room there, drinking coffee or reading something. He came around and hit me like that and says, get your bag and baggage, we're traveling. Yes, sir. So I got it, and we're always packed, ready to go. We took off in a DC-4, a Douglas DC-4 transport. And I was pilot, he was pilot, and I was co-pilot. And Captain Lewis and his crew were back in the back, and he had the nose, Captain Lewis, because I was up there flying with co-pilot. But anyhow, we flew from there, I think, to Ulithi, went from Tinian, we were on Tinian, the Mariana Island. It doesn't matter where we went, we ended up at Travis Air Force Base, I think that's where it was. Commandeered another plane and another crew, we all flew back to Patterson, New Jersey. Colonel Tibbets and I flew on to Washington, D.C. and finished at the Pentagon. And this gets funny. So he told me, said, you stay here, don't leave unless you go to the latrine, or the head as you call it, that's the restroom. And said, you may go to the canteen for refreshment, but tell this white guard here, have the same one. Where you going, don't be gone too long. I just acknowledged it, yes sir. And Navy, we said, aye, sir. Air Force, you just said, yes, sir. So anyhow, I sat there about 5 hours, and pretty soon he came out and hit me again and said, come on, let's go. I acknowledged, got up, and he said, incidentally, thanks for standing by and being available. He wanted me there to witness that he had gone in and talked to General Groves, the man in charge of the whole program. And I guess it took 5 hours to talk Groves out of, well, and letting him continue to be this entire show. So so we were leaving, this general came out and he said, you Colonel Tibbets and you, Navy aide, come in here. And I said, oh gosh, we've had it now. We came on in and he said, just sit down and relax, I have a refreshment for you. And he opened a wall safe and brought out a box of chocolate covered cherries. I was later to find out General Groves, Leslie Groves, was addicted to chocolate covered cherries. He actually had a big pouch on him, but he was a brilliant man, and that was all I had to come in for. So I was there to testify, back him up, if need be, what I'd heard. That was why I traveled back there from Marianas back to Washington. So if we take off, and Lewis still had the nose, we go to Lincoln, Nebraska, and go to the Martin aircraft plant, who was under contract to manufacture B-29s. Colonel Tibbets and I and the foreman went through, and I just kept my mouth shut, and I could catch some of it in context, but this foreman would say, now Colonel, you don't want that plane, that's made on the first shift, and they all have hangovers. And he said, a lot of them don't show up. And he went on, no, this is the day after, I made on Tuesday. And he said, now this one was started on Thursday and finished on Friday, and it is in perfect pristine shape. He said, there's even an extra turn on the screws to the toilet seat. And so the colonel took him at his word. So then he came back and he said, tell Captain Lewis to come here, I want to speak to him. So I went back, got him, and brought him up there, and he still had the nose and he didn't like me. So he said, you're going to bring this plane back to Tinian with your crew. That's why Lewis was there. He had it all figured out. So it got sort of funny, but Lewis did a good job. He brought the plane back. He was capable, and he didn't make any mistakes. But he never did work when he got out. Lewis did. I understood that he sold religious motifs, and that's the correct word, motif?
I don't really know.
Oh, little trinkets, crosses and things, but some people put on a lot. They acted as if things bothered them and shook them up and all, but he didn't even know what was going on. And I did, but Lewis didn't know. One of the crew members guessed.
So what was Lewis to do?
Well, Lewis brought the plane back to Tinian, and eventually, it was the lead plane, or the main plane, and Lewis thought he was going to fly the mission, but he didn't know what the mission was for. And Tibbets got in the pilot's seat, and now you'll be co-pilot. Well, he had the nose again, and well, like I say, I didn't care for him. But maybe I'm getting too confusing, but it's more of the funny part of it is, well, I wasn't there. I was back aboard the Antietam, the aircraft carrier, ready to take off the next day. So I knew nothing about all that. Trying to think what's so funny about it. It must not have been very important. But, oh yes, yes, he got the nose because Lewis considered it his airplane. And Colonel Tibbets named it after his mother, the Enola Gay. That was her name. She was part Indian, and that's an Indian name. And his father was a medical doctor, and I don't think they spoke. His father told him if he ever left to not come back. When he didn't go to medical school, went into the Air Force instead. But he went where his heart was, and it was there. He was good. Anyhow, it got funny, and that was about it, and about the extent of Lewis. But he got the nose over many things, but he was a good pilot. I don't know anything about it. My mission was to report to Tinian. So I was there when they returned from the mission, and Colonel Tibbets told me, he said, report to New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, cut yourself orders and transportation, commandeer an airplane, get out of here. You know nothing. I said, yes, sir. It was all top secret even then. Of course, they had more bombs to drop. By that time, they had almost 6, I understand. But Tibbets was quite a nice guy. While we were at Wendover Field up in Utah, his wife threw 2 or 3 temper tantrums and wanted to know why he couldn't do this and do that. So he sent her home. That was the end of the marriage. It didn't end officially for a number of years, but he met up with a French girl, I understand, and he said this marriage isn't going to last through our lifetime. It's over. But he very good. He very, very loyal and dedicated to his children. I think he had 3 sons, I'm not sure, but they all did well. But I can tell you something, another thing, humorous if you got time, want to hear
We have
about.
time.
Well, the war was over, and I think this was about 1949 or 50, and I was still with the Naval Reserve. I think I was still flying. I was up off at Air Force Base, and they're just a visiting fireman, so I went in the bar, of course, and there was as I went in, there was a dog tied outside to something, I forget what it was, a beautiful dog. Went in, there was a Army major there, I believe he was a major. He was a little guy, and he was at the bar and drinking, and I'd seen him more at the gymnasium hitting a punching bag, and I was a boxer too, and I admired his sport, but I didn't get involved. And he's lifting weights all the time. He was a physical fitness guru, you might say. So a 2-star general came in, and he said, "Who is the owner of that mutt tied outside of this club, this establishment?" So this major went over and he said, "Well, I am, General. That's my dog." "Well, I'll tell you one thing, that mutt better be gone by the time I leave here, or I'm making hamburger out of it." And this major said, "Well, anyone that attempts to harm that dog's going to come through me. That's got to, that's his exact word, that's got to come through me first." So the general said, "Well, let's go outside and settle our differences." So they went out, and we all followed, and this major, he was smart enough not to take off his coat. He figured that general would take a swing at him, which he did. Threw a haymaker right at him, took a swing at this major, who I told you was a physical nut. And, it turned out later on, I heard this years later, found out, he was a welterweight boxing champion. This major was in civilian life. So this major ducked, he missed him, he caught him on the left and set him sprawling. And the general got up cursing and swearing, came back and did the same thing. Like that, this major KO'd him, just knocked him out with another left. This duck got out of his way. So the next scene, as I understood, I didn't hear any more about it for years, but it seemed like the commanding officer of the base called Colonel Tibbets, and he said, I got an officer here that's well qualified and all, but he's in some trouble, and if you won't take him under your wing and keep tab on him, I'll have to court-martial him. And Tibbets said he'd do it. So they ended up, Tibbets and this major went in business together when they got out of the service. They ran a jet service, transport service. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Anyhow, they got along quite well, and it was successful, but they did away with it, dispensed or sold this. I never did hear what they said to the captain, but I think, the major, I think they just told him to watch his temper, and his fists were lethal weapons, and he's getting off lucky. Just accept this transfer. So they called the two-star general in, and that the quartermaster, who was the same as Youvan or recording secretary, well, he put the word out that he told him that he's being transferred, and he said, one word of advice to you, hereinafter assess you the enemy and your opposition before you attack. Good words of advice. So I really didn't have a lot to do with the whole situation, although I was trusted. I knew what was going on. Lieutenant Beeser knew what was going on. Captain Parsons, the ordnance man, did. Lieutenant Beeser, it seemed like he reported, he said the Japanese have picked us up on radar. And then later on he said, they're not on a frequency, any of them, that would detonate our bomb, you see. They're afraid the radar would do it. So he was smart. And he told me one time, he says, I'm going out with them tonight to round up some Japanese, and he says, I never killed anyone in my life. And I said, well, maybe you won't have to. He said, well, what'll I do? And I said, well, they'll tell you. And I said, but they'll get in a big circle, and they'll run them in like they will on a wolf hunt, and when they get in close, well, you shoot them if they don't surrender. Well, anyhow, they rounded up 6 or 7 Japs that night. And the reason they had that round up there, they would come aboard or come on the air base there at Tinian, Northfield, and raid the garbage cans, and sometimes they get into the mess hall and steal food, which wasn't too bad. But one time they put laundry detergent in the soup. I wasn't there, fortunately, and I guess the whole base was really in bad shape. Diarrhea, urinary problems, excessive urination, and they gave the name of it as the world's largest urinal. But anyhow, that was something to be scared of. They didn't know where they were. You knew they might be out there. They'd cut your throat for a cigarette or a stick of chewing gum or a candy bar. So you had to be careful what you were doing. But that was funny, but I was glad to get off that island. It wasn't very pleasant. It wasn't anything like Guam or what's that other one, doesn't matter. But this Tinian, it was a hellhole world. It's just grown up in weeds now except for one landing strip. And there are about 500 natives living there, and a Catholic priest or some kind of a preacher holds church there in a Quonset hut that's been to man. But it was a hellish place to be. They had 3 airfields on it though at the time. That was pretty good. But that's all I had to do with it. But it was real humorous. I remember the humorous things. We didn't meet up with any tragedies in that particular case. Unfortunately, we did aboard the carrier. Kamikaze had it one time. And that was sad, but we won't go into that. But I started out on an Intrepid CV-11, and I was sent off on a mission to photograph one myself. Well, they normally send you out alone, but they did on this one. And I returned, and I couldn't find the carrier. Well, they'd always tell us what we'll be. We'll be on this heading for so many minutes at a certain speed. We'll be on this heading, this heading. Then you take the resultant, go in there, and then that would be where the carrier was. So you would head.
So they gave you a bunch of zigzag vectors on the way out, and then you're supposed to go straight back. Is that the idea?
Well, they wouldn't do that, but they would show us where the carrier is and say, here's our intent. Go this way, that way, this way, this way. Quite often it'd be that way.
This is the carrier.
Yeah, into the wind. Well, anyhow, I couldn't find it. So I started doing a big wide search, and I've been down in the water 6 times. Engine failure, most of the time I'd run out of gas. I was lost. I thought, well, nothing big. And anyhow, I spotted a carrier. I loped the plane like that. I didn't break radio silence. And they picked me up with a blinker. And I came on in and landed the first time. The signal officer gave me a signal like that. I came in just off of the tail of it here. Usually you make a circle, half a circle. So I told him, I said, I'm a vagabond. I messed up on my navigation, could not find my ship. So accordingly I landed here, as you can see. And they said, what is your carrier? And I said, Intrepid. And they said, well, Intrepid's been hit by kamikaze.
Mm.
They said they have repaired into a rainstorm and they're having trouble steering. And when darkness hits, they're going to go on into Ulithi for repair and then back to the States. And said, Lescock, you missed your chance to get back to the States. I said, I don't want to get back to the States. I have reason to want to be out here. So anyhow, that ended that. So it wasn't very long while orders came through, remain aboard Antietam. I think that was a small carrier, but they didn't want to make any motions about it. But I was asleep one night, and they were supposed to awaken me, I think about 12:30, and they wakened me about, I forget. Anyhow, what it was, it says Enola Gate departed home base at a certain time. It was already in the air. Mission scrubbed. Report 10 in. First availability. That meant that fly over there and check in. Well, that's how I got over there and was there when Enola Gate got back from the strike. And all he told me, he said, too many airplanes in the air. Well, I went into hell of a depression. I couldn't eat for about a week.
What exactly did they tell you got scrubbed?
Big one?
What got scrubbed?
I'm sorry.
I said, what got scrubbed? Why did they say the mission got scrubbed?
That meant they did away with it. Just scrubbed it. Too many airplanes in the area at the time.
Your mission?
Yeah, my
Yes.
part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But their mission wasn't. But the main mission, I might have tipped them off that something was going on. I don't know if you follow me or not. This extra plane circling, it wasn't used to. And weather planes were flying over Hiroshima all the time. There was very little anti-aircraft fire or anything. They just practically had nothing except kamikaze pilots and Baka pilots and the suicide pilots. But that was, they just told me my mission, your mission scrubbed, report 10 in. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, forget about it. What you're supposed to do, report there. And so it was quite interesting, I'll say the least. So we're going to the next question.
Okay. Let's see. It looks like we're staying on World War II. I won't ask you any dentistry questions for a while. You told me something about Vector 235 out of San Diego the other day.
Oh yes, I think that occurred after the war was over. I was there at North Island, and they sent us out on a practice mission, which was needless, and we knew it. But I was flight leader, and I joined Air Group 7 by that time. And I had 7 pilots on my wing and had a tow plane with a target. We were to practice that, and our quadrant, or whatever it was 235, meaning that direction. And this fellow from another one, he thought he'd been assigned that, and I was in his way. So he came up alongside him, as the leader did. I found out later on. And he was mad, and he had a real crease in his chin, looked like a bulldog. And most women would get on the way, and I wouldn't break radio silence. And he was still talking, but I just turned the volume down. And he just kept on like that. So he gave me the finger, so I thumbed my nose at him, just infuriated him. And so then he came up and he started flipping the wing on our cat. So I had enough of it, so I just dropped back like I was going to, and the flight was over there. I turned it over to my second in command, and I just dropped back, and I just pulled up and cut his tail off. And he bailed out, and I had to bail out. But he was mad. I don't know if he was mad or just pissed off. But I never did see him. But he looked like a bulldog, and I told him, yeah, he got a personality problem. He got a temper problem. And I said, well, maybe he got over it for a while. And he said, you didn't call that mid-air collision on purpose. Oh, me? Why would you think I'd do something? Don't answer a question with a question. Well, if I did, I'm not admitting it now, sir. And that was it. They laughed and let me go. Well, I've had some interesting experiences, and one of my main job was I was an undercover intelligence officer, but more or less of a sneak thief. And I would find out who was stealing from the Navy, civilian contractors. One of them guy was full commander. He stole some whale boats. Another one was stealing gasoline. So I was sort of a sleuth like that. Well, when the war ended, they sent me back over to Kaneohe over on Honolulu, and I was made a dog robber. And the dog robber steals things for high-ranking officers. You understand what that is?
Yes.
So I was pretty good at that, too. I stole a whole plane full of whiskey on one occasion, absolutely, completely full. Signed false documents and came in like that and signed a fictitious name. And I was later to discover that my writing, my left hand, was just about the same thing as what on my right hand. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know it.
I'd gotten polio in dental school, so I can't write with my left hand anymore, but at that time I could write with either one. When I was in school, I could work with either hand. Anyhow, this gets about half funny. It might be too lengthy. Are you in a big hurry?
No, we're not in a hurry.
But they told me, they said, you're to be in an administration building in the C wing, and the C wing would be like, this is C wing. As I recall, yeah, that's the way it was. You will be against the south bulkhead, this is north. Here, you will face north. You will be approached. You'll not look one way or the other. You'll be given instruction. And if you want to accept it, well, you can say affirmative, accepted, or not. So this person sided up beside me, and he said, you will take a Coronado as a PB-4Y seaplane to Oakland, and you will get the 2 outboard engines replaced with new ones. On your return, you will have a cargo And what was it? He said, your cargo will consist of live lobster, Maine lobsters. Now, mind you, lobsters on the west coast, but they aren't considered as good as the Maine lobsters. They're better, they claim. You'll have imported French champagne and Kansas City strip sirloin steaks will be tacked in dry ice. I just acknowledged. And he said there will be a manifest of crew. There'll be 15 civilians, tentatively, maybe more. And you'll be completely aloof to them, and you'll remember nothing about them or their identity, their sex, their gender, their size, anything. Well, it ended up they were young girlies, good-looking ones. And so I nodded and I said, just one thing here. I said, I'm not really proficient and qualified in this plane. I said, are you sure you have the right person, sir? He said, don't call me sir. You don't know who I am or what I am. I said, Roger. I meant all right. He said, we're assigned Lieutenant Diamond as your co-pilot, or Ensign Diamond. And I thought, well, that damned ensign. Well, he showed up, and he was awful old to be an ensign, so he knew what to do, but he didn't. He just accepted commands, and I asked his advice. And he said, your decision, you're flying it, you're doing all right, sure. Well, anyhow, we landed there in the bay, and I wasn't used to that current and that undercurrent. So I just radioed in and I said, send out a taxi pilot to beach this airplane. I said, it must be beached, being brought up on the ramp. And they did. They sent out an aviation machinist mate first class. And he got aboard and he saw me and he said, well, you know more about this than I do, sir. I said, no, I don't. It's your trip. It's your airplane. Expedite or reject the assignment. Oh no, I said, you can do it, yes. Well, I'll have to get your permission. No, you won't have to get anything. I'm leaving a flight deck. So he brought it on in. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't a pilot, but he knew how to taxi it, how to beach it. And I sure as hell didn't. This ensign Diamond, he just up there and didn't make any, show any reaction at all. So I sat back in the back and I watched what he was doing just out of curiosity to see if I could learn anything. So they changed the engines, they're ready to take off, get back in the water. So I got up in the front and I made him take the steak out of dry ice because I didn't want carbon dioxide to asphyxiate somebody. It wouldn't have, coming out of it wouldn't have sealed the airplane at all. It was drafty. And they did, they agreed with it. So I didn't see any of the manifest passengers. So anyhow, we get on back and it was very evident who we had there, perfume and hairspray. I guess it was hairspray. But they were very well groomed, I presume, those women. And this person to contact me was Admiral Truman, a 3-star admiral, assistant to Nimitz, Admiral Nimitz, a 5-star admiral by that time. Anyhow, I could see out of the corner of my eye who he was. I could see by his shirt that it had insignia on it, by the bleach marks and the pen marks, you know. But he didn't have any insignia on. And they didn't want to be identified.
I see.
So anyhow, we returned, and next thing we knew was someone had blown the whistle on us. So I had to testify, and this got funny. Got up there, and this prosecutor, he said, well, who gave you these orders? I don't know, sir. Well, I didn't see him. And one thing led to another. Well, why didn't you see him? Well, I was told to look straight ahead. I see nothing and hear, I know nothing but listen. Well, did you ever catch a glimpse of this person? Just only slight. And he said, well, I was told not to look around, look straight ahead. And he said, all right, I want you to look out in the gallery. Oh, about that time, the presiding officer, he got up, he said, well, this doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. He said, Lieutenant, I was a lieutenant at the time. He said, I want you to get up and look around the gallery and see if you can spot that person. Well, yes, sir. So I get up like that and looking. And this prosecutor, this attorney, he says, all right, what's all this? What's all that? Well, I'm from Kansas and I'm part Indian. And that's the way we scout, us Indians. And everyone got to laughing, and this admiral said, we'll dispense with the levity. He said, do you spot him there, Lieutenant? No, sir. This hearing is closed. Well, he was the one that sent me, Admiral Dremel. But he didn't say he was in this room. He said he's out in the gallery. So this legal officer comes up, and he's going to do this and that. And I said, well, no, you haven't heard the last of this. I said, well, why don't we settle this right now? Would you like to go a few fast ones in the ring? And I wasn't afraid of him. I was a lightweight boxing champion in boot camp. And I could handle myself. I was fast, had good eyes and good feet. And I could move around with nothing else. I could get somebody dizzy just by dancing around. And then I could let them have it. I said, or would you rather meet me out on the grinder? You name it, knives, guns, or fists. And he took all. Next thing I knew, they said, well, they brought charges against me for challenging to a duel. Well, I said, I didn't challenge him. I asked him if he'd like to. Well, it's all right to ask him if he'd like to go a few fast ones in the ring, but or would you rather meet me on the grinder? And you name it, knives, guns, or fists. If he said knives or guns, well, then he would challenge me to a duel. It's against regs, challenge anybody to regulation, Navy regs, to a duel. So that's the last I heard of that. Of course, they shipped me out of there in a hell of a hurry. They didn't want me to be questioned anymore. But some of my women friends, they just thought that was terrible. So those high-ranking officers, they were fighting a war, and had our lives and our responsibility, and there they were shipping young women over there. I said, well, I guess they were pretty hard up, maybe. Or they didn't want to go back to their old lady. I think I told your mother that once, and she glared at me, and I don't think she didn't say anything wrong. So I had a lot of humor in the whole thing, but I really didn't have a lot of exposure on that at all again, except I was what you might call a chase pilot.
Mm-hmm.
I was to record this, and also I would keep my mouth shut, and I would get information, and I'd hear information, and I'd report it if he wanted to hear it. If he didn't want to hear it, he'd ask a question in the middle of my delivery. I knew that.
Dr. Reed, I think you have some insight into John Glenn's character. You told me one time that you ran into him.
Yes, when I was in basic training, that was the primary training was the biplane at Livermore, California. The basic training was at Corpus Christi, and they flew a full T's. We learned formation flying. And before I was to a room, and John Glenn was one of the roommates. Well, the other two guys, I don't even know who they were. They were nondescript and low mentality, I figured. But they found out that he was real religious and he didn't like barnyard language or swearing. So they started doing it just to shoulder Mako and to upset him. And I challenged them. I told them. I said, hey, let's knock it off. I said, it doesn't take much mentality. And I said, you have about as much mentality as a constipated turtle, either of you. I said, now knock it off. About that time, John Glenn said, I can handle it myself, Bob. Well, they shut up. But anyhow, he got to talking to me. He wouldn't talk to them. And he told me that he was engaged to a Presbyterian minister's daughter. I think that's what it was, a preacher's daughter. And they were going to get married if and when he completed training. They were anyhow, but said they were waiting for that. He couldn't be married and be in training. And he said she has a speech impediment. I found out later on she stuttered.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, I asked him what he took in high school, junior high school, middle school was this time. And he said, well, he was insistent that he be enrolled in a sewing class. And they said, we can't do that. Well, I began to wonder about him taking sewing. Well, he wanted to know what people had to do. And it turned out then that they made us sew up a sail out of a piece of cloth or anything. And it turned out it was survival, if you're out on water, you needed a sail, and you take your shirt and sew it and make it into that. Or anyhow, they finally let him do it. So I didn't really think he was a queer, which I'm sure he wasn't. But that's about all he ever told me, except we would go out on a flight. There'd be an instructor, there'd be a lead plane, then there'd be about, I think there was 8 of them, 4.
And a wing.
Yeah, like that. And he would be what they call a chase pilot, and he would observe. And
So he'd fly around this
he'd fly
formation you've
around,
drawn.
zigzag, and watch us from above, and he would, anyhow, they changed the lead, and then he'd assess how well each one held their position. So we'd land, or we'd all be in the hangar, and most of us would be slouched like this, a pair of coveralls up against the plane, and he'd call on it. He'd say, well, we have Cadet Reed. Oh, yeah, right here. And no formality. So he said, Cadet Glenn. And he said, present, sir, and he's standing there at attention. At ease. And he sort of dropped his shoulders a little, but he was all seriousness. He wasn't a bad guy, but he just zero personality as far as we were concerned. Well, on Sunday afternoon on that base, we wouldn't be assigned anything. We had the afternoon off, but we couldn't leave the base. But we could go into the beer hall and we could buy beer on Sunday afternoon. Well, they'd be in there drinking beer, and Glenn would be out running with his sweatshirt. He said, they're trying to make a bad example of us. I said, no. I said, you stop and look at it now. He's all legs and hips, and he's not real tall. And if he puts on any more weight, out he goes out of the Navy. So he's not going to put a gut on him drinking beer. He's out there running to keep any weight off of him. Well, some of them listened, some of them, he just says he's just a chicken ass. I said, well, it's easy to say, but it could, you don't know if it's right or not. But I say that's why he's out running. I said, like repeating myself, he's all legs and he's all hips. He has great big legs, he's muscular, but he was on the borderline of being too heavy. I was lucky I was on the lower edge of this weight situation. So that's the last I ever saw of him. His wife, when they circled the earth, well, they sent Lyndon Johnson by her home. They wanted her to be there, and she wouldn't show up. So they sent him by there with the television crew, like this one. It's a photographic crew for the Fox News, and she wouldn't come out of the house. And they said, well, this is Vice President Lyndon Johnson here. She said, I'm still not going to make an appearance. Well, she wouldn't come out because she stuttered. That's when I found out what her speech impediment was.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, Johnson put his tail between his legs and had him drive off in a limousine, and Secret Service man and all. But I don't blame him. But that's relative and important. Better go on to the next question.
Okay.
I'm carried away.
Oh,